Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. I'm going to read to you today the story of two saints. One is Saint Christopher and one is Saint Martha. And I think both of them are for our times because Saint Martha fought a dragon and Saint Christopher was worshiping Satan until he found that Christ was more powerful. So there are a lot of people today that maybe are into some kind of worship of the devil, and so we can pray to Saint Christopher and Saint Martha for them, or if you're having trouble, you could pray to them. This is from the Golden Legend, Readings on the Saints, Jacobus de Veragine. Saint Christopher. Before Christopher was baptized, he was called Reprobus, meaning outcast, but afterwards he was called Christophoros, the Christ-bearer. He bore Christ in 4 ways, namely on his shoulders, when he carried him across the river, in his body by mortification, and in his mind by devotion, and in his mouth by confessing Christ and preaching him. Christopher was a Canaanite by birth, a man of prodigious size. He was 12 feet tall, and fearsome of visage. According to some accounts of his life, it happened one day, when he was in the presence of a certain Canaanite king, that the idea came to him of going in quest of the greatest prince in the world and staying with him. He came to a mighty king who was regarded generally as the world's greatest ruler. When this king saw Christopher, he received him gladly and made him a member of his court. Then one day the court jester sang some ditty before the king, in which frequent mention was made of the devil. The king was a Christian and made the sign of the cross on his forehead when he heard the devil spoken of. Christopher noticed this and wondered why the king did it and what the sign meant. He asked the king about it, and when the ruler did not answer, said to him, "Unless you answer my question, I will not stay with you any longer." The king, thus pressed, told him, "Whenever I hear the devil mentioned, I defend myself with this sign, for fear the devil might get some power over me and do me harm." Christopher, if you are afraid of being harmed by the devil, this proves that he is greater and more powerful than you are, or you wouldn't be afraid of him. Therefore, I am frustrated in my hope that I had found the greatest and most powerful Lord in the world. So now farewell. I'll go and look for the devil, accept him as my master, and become his servant. Christopher left that king and went in search of the devil. He was going through a desert when he saw a great host of soldiers, and one of them, fiercer and more terrible than the rest, came to him and asked where he was going. And Christopher answered, "I'm looking for the Lord Devil. I want to take him as my master." The other said to him, "I am the one you are looking for." Christopher was happy to hear this and pledged himself to serve him forever, acknowledging him as his Lord and Master. They marched along the highway until they came to a cross erected at roadside. When the devil saw it, he was terror-stricken, left the road, and led Christopher over a wild and desolate tract before returning to the road. Christopher was surprised at this, and asked the devil what made him so afraid that he left the high road and took another way through a rough wilderness. The devil refused to state his reason. And Christopher said, "Unless you tell me what this is all about, I shall leave you immediately." The demon, no longer able to evade the question, said, "There was a man named Jesus Christ who was nailed to a cross, and when I see the sign of this cross, I'm filled with terror and run away." Christopher, "Well then, this Christ, whose sign you dread so much, is greater and more powerful than you are. Therefore I have labored in vain, and have not yet found the greatest prince of the world. So goodbye to you. I'm leaving you and going in search of Christ." He looked long and far for someone who could give him word of Christ. Finally he came upon a hermit who preached Christ to him and instructed him diligently in the Christian faith. He said to Christopher, "This king whom you wish to serve requires that you do his will in many ways. For instance, you will have to fast frequently. Christopher, let him require some other form of obedience. That one I just can't do." Again the hermit, "You will also have to offer him many prayers." Christopher, "I don't even know what that means, so I can't perform that kind of service." The hermit then asked him, "Do you know the famous river where many people trying to get across go under and perish?" "Yes, I do," said Christopher. The hermit, "You're big enough and strong enough. Go dwell by the river, and if you help those who wish to cross it, that will greatly please Christ the King, whom you wish to serve, and I hope he might show himself to you there." Christopher, "Good. That kind of service I can give, and I promise to serve him that way." He went to the river and built himself a shelter to live in. Instead of a staff, he used a long pole to steady himself in the water, and carried across all those who wished to go. Many days later he was resting in his shelter when he heard a child's voice calling him, "Christopher, come out and carry me across." He jumped to his feet and went out, but found no one. He went indoors again, heard the same voice calling him, but ran out and again saw no one. The third time he responded to the same call and found a child standing on the river bank. The child begged him to carry him across the river, and Christopher lifted him on his shoulders, grasped his great staff, and strode into the water. But little by little the water grew rougher, and the child became as heavy as lead. The farther he went, the higher rose the waves, and the weight of the child pressed down upon his shoulders so crushingly that he was in dire distress. He feared that he was about to flounder, but at last he reached the other bank. Setting the child down, he said to him, "My boy, you put me in great danger, and you weighed so much that if I had had the whole world on my back, I could not have felt it a heavier burden." The child answered him, "Don't be surprised, Christopher. You were not only carrying the whole world, you had him who created the world upon your shoulders. I am Christ your King, to whom you render service by doing the work you do here. And if you want proof that what I am saying is true, when you get back to your little house, plant your staff in the earth, and tomorrow you will find it in leaf and bearing fruit." With that the child vanished. Christopher crossed over and thrust his staff into the earth near his shelter. The next morning he rose and found the staff bearing leaves and fruits, like a palm tree. After that Christopher went to Samos, a city in Lycia. He did not understand the language spoken there, and prayed the Lord to make him able to understand it. As he prayed, the judges thought he was insane and left him alone. But when the favor he had prayed for was granted, he covered his face and went to the place where Christians were being tortured and executed, to speak to them and give them courage in the Lord. One of the judges struck him in the face, and Christopher, uncovering his face, said, "If I were not a Christian, I would quickly have revenge for this insult." Then he planted his staff in the earth and prayed the Lord that it might burst into leaf and thus help to convert the people. Leaves sprouted instantly, and 8,000 men believed and became Christians. The king now sent 200 soldiers to bring Christopher to him, but they found him at prayer and were afraid to tell him why they had come. The king sent as many more, but they, when they found him praying, prayed with him. Christopher rose and said to them, "For whom are you looking?" Seeing his face, they said, "The king sent us to bring you to him in bonds." Christopher, "If I did not wish to go, you could not take me, bound or not." They said, "Well then, if you don't want to come, take your leave and go wherever you wish, and we'll tell the king that we could not find you anywhere." "Not so," he replied. "I will go with you." So Christopher converted the soldiers to the faith and had them tie his hands behind his back and present him, thus bound, to the king. The sight of him terrified the king, who fell from his seat. His servitors raised him, and he asked Christopher his name and country of origin. Christopher replied, "Before baptism I was called Reprobus, but now I am called Christopher." The king: "You have taken a foolish name, calling yourself after Christ, who was crucified and could do nothing to save himself, and now can do nothing for you. Now then, you trouble-making Canaanite, why do you not sacrifice to our gods?" Christopher: "You are rightly called Dangus, because you are the death of the world and the devil's partner, and your gods are the work of men's hands." The king: "You were brought up among wild beasts, and you can do only the works of savages and talk only of things unknown to men. Now, however, if you are ready to sacrifice, I will bestow great honors upon you. If not, you will be tortured to death." Christopher refused to sacrifice, and the king put him in jail. As for the soldiers whom he had sent after Christopher, he had them beheaded for the name of Christ. Now the king had 2 young women named Nicaea and other Aquilina. They were told to try to seduce Christopher, promising them a reward if they succeeded. Christopher quickly saw through the stratagem and knelt to pray. Christopher said, "What are you trying to do, and for what reason were you sent here?" The 2 were frightened by the radiance of his face and said, "Saint of God, pity us. Make us able to believe in God whom you preach." Word of this reached the king, who had the women brought to him and said, "So, you too have been seduced. I swear by the gods that unless you sacrifice to the gods, you will die an awful death." They answered, "If your will is that we offer sacrifice, have the streets cleared, and order all the people into the temple." This done, they went into the temple, loosening their girdles, and threw them around the necks of the idols, pulling them to the ground and reducing them to dust. Then they said to the assistants, "Call your doctors and let them heal your gods." By order of the king, Aquilina was then hung by the wrists, and a huge stone was tied to her feet, and breaking all her limbs. When she had breathed her last to the Lord, her sister Nicaea was thrown into the fire, but when she emerged unscathed, she was beheaded at once. Christopher was then brought before the king, who ordered him to be beaten with iron rods, and to have an iron helmet heated in the fire placed on his head. Then he had an iron chair made. The saint was bound into it, and then a fire was lighted underneath, and the pitch thrown on the flames. But the chair crumbled like wax, and Christopher came away from it unharmed. Then the king had him lashed to a pillar, and ordered 400 bowmen to shoot arrows into him. But the arrows hung in mid-air, and not a single one of them could touch him. But when the king, thinking that he had been mortally wounded, came to mock him, suddenly one of the arrows came through the air, turned back, and struck the tyrant in the eye, blinding him. Christopher said to him, "Tyrant, I will be dead by tomorrow. Then make a paste with my blood and rub it on your eyes, and you will recover your sight." By the king's order, the saint was led away to the place of execution, where after praying he was beheaded. The king took a little of his blood and rubbed it on his eyes, saying, "In the name of God and Saint Christopher," and his sight was restored immediately, and then he was baptized and issued a decree that whoever blasphemed against God or Saint Christopher was to be beheaded at once. Ambrose, in his preface, says of this martyr, "O Lord, you granted such a wealth of virtue and such grace of teaching to Christopher, that by his gleaming miracle he recalled 48,000 men from the error of paganism to the cult of Christian dogma." Nicaea and Aquilina had been engaged in terrible works, but he won them over to the practice of chastity and schooled them to receive the crown of martyrdom. For this he was strapped into the iron chair in the middle of a blazing fire, but feared no harm from the heat. For a whole day the storm of arrows shot by the soldiers could not pierce him. Yet one arrow struck the executioner in the eye, and the blessed martyr's blood mixed with earth restored his sight, and by removing the body's blindness, also illuminated his mind. For the saint besought your forgiveness, and by his supplication obtained the cure of disease and infirmities. I thought that was a super cool story of St. Christopher. Did you notice how back then a lot of people couldn't swim, and so St. Christopher was trying to help them cross the river? And there were whole orders that were made, and their sole purpose was to build bridges across rivers to help people so that they wouldn't drown. And that was an order of the Catholic Church. And the next story I'm going to read is about Saint Martha. Martha, who was Christ's hostess, was of royal lineage. Her father was named Cyrus, and her mother Echaria. Her father was a governor of Syria and many maritime lands. By inheritance through her mother, she possessed 3 towns, namely Magdalum and the 2 Bethanies, and as well as parts of Jerusalem. Nowhere do we read that she had a husband or ever lived with a man. This noble hostess waited on the Lord and wanted her sister to do likewise, because, as she saw it, the whole world would not be enough to serve so great a guest. After the Lord's ascension, when the dispersion of the disciples occurred, Martha, with her brother Lazarus and her sister Mary Magdalene, Blessed Maximinus, who had baptized the sisters to whom the Holy Spirit had entrusted them, and many others, were put on rafts by the infidels, without oars, sails, rudders, or food, and with the Lord as pilot they made port at Marseilles. Then they went to the region around Aix, and converted the local populace to the faith. Martha spoke eloquently and was gracious to all. At that time, in the forest along the Rhone, between Arles and Avignon, there was a dragon that was half animal and half fish, larger than an ox, longer than a horse, with teeth as sharp as horns, and a pair of bucklers on either side of his body. This beast lurked in the river, killing all those who tried to sail by, and sinking their vessels. The dragon had come from Galatia in Asia, begotten of Leviathan, an extremely ferocious water serpent, and Onochius, an animal bred in the region of Galatia, which shoots its dung like parts at pursuers within the space of an acre. Whatever this touches it burns up, as by fire. The people asked Martha for help, and she went after the dragon. She found him in the forest in the act of devouring a man, sprinkled him with blessed water, and had a cross held up in front of him. The brute was subdued at once, and stood still like a sheep, while Martha tied him up with her girdle, and the people killed him then and there with stones and lances. The inhabitants called the dragon Tarasconus, and in memory of this event the place is called Tarascon, though previously it had been called Nurluk, black place, because the forest whereabouts was dark and shadowy. With the permission of Saint Maximinus and her sister, Martha stayed there and devoted herself continually to prayer and fasting. Eventually a large congregation of sisters formed around her, and a great basilica dedicated to the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, was built. The sisters avoided meat, fats, eggs, cheese, and wine, took food only once a day, and genuflected 100 times a day, the same number of times at night. It happened one day when Martha was preaching between Avignon town and Rhone river that a youth who was standing on the other side of the river wanted to hear what she was saying. But he had not a boat, so he jumped in and started to swim across. But the swift current caught him and he drowned. It took 2 days to find his body, which was brought to Martha and laid at her feet. She then lay prone on the ground, her arms extended in a form of a cross, and prayed, Adonai, Lord Jesus Christ, you once raised my brother Lazarus, your friend, to life. My dear guest, look upon the faith of these people gathered here, and give him life to his body. She took the lad's hand, and he stood up and received holy baptism shortly afterwards. Eusebius reports in the 5th book of his ecclesiastical history that a woman who has been miraculously cured of an issue of blood erected in her garden a statue of Christ dressed in the same garment as she had seen him in, and prayed before it devoutly. The grass that grew around the statue had never had any curative power, but now any grass that touched the hem of the garment was so filled with power that it cured many of their illnesses. Ambrose says that the woman whom the Lord cured of the issue of blood was Martha herself. Jerome has a story also reported in the Tripartite history about the Emperor Julian the Apostate. The emperor, so this story goes, took away the statue of Christ above referred to and substituted one of himself, which was struck by lightning and destroyed. During the year before her death, the Lord revealed to Martha the time of her passing. Throughout the year she suffered continually from fevers. Then a week before she died, she heard the angelic choirs bearing her sister's soul to heaven. She called all her brothers and sisters in religion together and said, My companions and dear friends, rejoice with me, I beg of you, because I rejoice at the sight of the choirs of angels bearing my sister's soul to the promised mansions. O my beautiful and beloved sister, may you live in the blessed abode with him who was your master and my guest. At that very moment Saint Martha sensed the nearness of her own death, and cautioned her companions to keep the lamps lighted and to watch with her until she died. At midnight before the day of her passing, however, when those watching with her had fallen asleep, a strong wind swept through and blew out all the lamps. She perceived a swarm of evil spirits surrounding her, and began to pray, My father Eloi, my dear guest, my seducers, holding lists of all the wrongs I have done, are gathered to devour me. Eloi, do not abandon me. Hasten to help me. Then she saw her sister coming to her, carrying a torch with which she lighted all the candles and lamps, and while they called to each other by name, behold, Christ came, saying, Come, beloved hostess, and where I am, there you will be with me. You welcomed me in your house, I shall welcome you into my heaven, and for love of you, I shall listen favorably to those who invoke you. As the hour of her death drew near, she had herself carried out of the door, so that she might see the heavens, and asked that she be laid down upon ashes, and a cross be held before her eyes. Then she prayed in the following words, My dear guest, take care of your poor little servant, and as you deign to accept my hospitality, receive me now into your heavenly dwelling. And then she asked to have the Passion according to St. Luke read to her, and at the words, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit, she breathed her last in the Lord. The following day, which was Sunday, the office of lauds was being chanted around the body of the saint, while at the third hour Blessed Fronto was celebrating a solemn mass. At the reading of the epistle he fell asleep, and the Lord appeared to him and said, My beloved Fronto, if you want to fulfill the promises you once made to our hostess, rise quickly and follow me. And in an instant they were in Tarascon, and led the singing of the whole office around Martha's body, while those assisting sang the responses. Then, with their own hands, they laid her body in the tomb. Meanwhile, in another city, The deacon, who was about to chant the gospel, woke Bishop Fronto to ask him his blessing, and Fronto, barely awake, answered, "My brother, why did you awaken me? The Lord Jesus Christ brought me to the body of Martha, his hostess, and we carried her to her burial. Quick, send messages there to bring back our gold ring and silver gloves." I entrusted them to the sacristan as I prepared to bury her, and forgot to retrieve them. You woke me up so suddenly. The messengers went and found things as the bishop had said, and brought back the ring, but only one glove. The sacristan kept the other in memory of the event. Saint Fronto added a detail, saying, "As we were leaving the church after the burial, a brother from that place, who was a learned of letters, followed us and asked the Lord what his name was. And the Lord said nothing, but showed the man an open book he was carrying in his hand, on which nothing was written except the verse, 'In perpetual memoriam my hostess will be just. She will not be afraid of hearing evil on the last day.' And when the book was closed, he found that the same verse was written on each page. Many miracles took place at the saint's tomb. Clovis, king of the Franks, had become a Christian and been baptized by Saint Remy. Suffering from a grave malady of the kidneys, he went to Martha's burial place and there recovered his health. In return for that favor, he endowed the place and all the land, including villas and strongholds, for 3 miles around on both banks of the Rhone, declaring the area free of taxes and services. Martella, a serving maid to Martha, wrote her life. Later she went to Salvonia and preached the gospel of God there, and 10 years after Martha's death fell asleep in the Lord. The end. Ooh, that was pretty interesting how Saint Martha fought a dragon. It kind of reminds me of when Saint Patrick got rid of all of the snakes in Ireland, and also I believe it was Saint Columba who cast out a devil in Loch Ness. He was from Ireland and he was trying to convert the Picts in Scotland, and he was trying to cross Loch Ness. He was trying to figure out the best way of doing it. He saw a boat on the other side, and while he was looking, he saw there were some people on the side of the river with a man who was dead, and the people said that a water monster had attacked him. So St. Columba put his staff over the man, and the man came back to life. Then he told one of his brothers to go across the river and get a boat, which was on the other side, even though the monster might be in the water. So this brother obeyed very obediently and went across, and there the monster was coming after the brother until St. Columba blessed the monster with the sign of the cross, and the monster went down into the depths of Loch Ness. So I believe that some people say they have seen this monster still. Not sure, but I do believe what happened with St. Columba. Well, I hope that you will pray to St. Christopher and St. Martha, and to help you grow closer to Christ in these crazy times we live. It's always a good time to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Where evil abounds, grace abounds all the more. Thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads, and we'll have another religious story next Sunday.